Okay, welcome to the deep dive. Today we are really getting into a massive piece of work, Tom Wolfe's The Bonfire of the Vanities.
Huge. It's quite a bit to unpack, isn't it? We're looking at Wolf's, incredibly sharp take on New York in the 80s, high
Yeah.
society, the Bronx courthouse, the whole spectrum.
Exactly. And our mission here really is to pull out those key observations Wolfe makes about, wealth, power, the media, justice, all seen through these characters whose worlds are just about to collide spectacularly.
And right at the center, you've got Sherman McCoy, this guy who genuinely sees himself as a master of the universe. We're going to trace how just one terrible incident completely unravels his life.
Yeah, and pulls him into parts of the city he, frankly, tried very hard to pretend didn't exist.
And we'll look at everyone else too, right? The elite, the ambitious prosecutors, the activists, the very cynical press corps. It's like this one event just exposes all the fault lines.
The raw nerves, the hypocrisies, the whole messy reality of the city.
Yeah. So expect some really vivid details from the source. Observations that still feel, well, surprisingly relevant today, actually.
Okay, let's dive right in. So first up, Sherman McCoy. Living this life he thinks is the absolute peak. Wolfe calls him a master of the universe at Pierce and Pierce. It wasn't just a job title, it was like his identity after a big score.
Oh, totally. He felt invincible. And his lifestyle, I mean, it showed that sense of maybe entitlement.
Hmm.
Wolf points out the apartment, what was it, $2.6 million?
Yeah, but with $1.8 million in debt, huge payments, a massive balloon payment coming up, he's basically living way beyond his means, but feeling like he's in this season of the rising sap.
And Wolf sets up this fascinating contrast with his father, right? John Campbell McCoy, the Lion. Also a big shot lawyer, but fundamentally different.
Took the subway on principle, lived in a house, bought as an old wreck, watched every penny.
Exactly. It highlights this generational shift. The father, sort of old school duty and proportion, he'd have been, well, horrified by Sherman's debt, his lack of principle. It's like the lessons just didn't stick.
Wolfe says this new breed, they weren't about principle, they were about insulation. Just walling themselves off.
Which leads us straight to the moment that insulation gets shattered. Sherman's in his Mercedes, late night Bronx, with his mistress, Maria Ruskin. They get lost.
Take a wrong turn onto an expressway ramp, and there are two young black men there.
One has a tire. Maria, who's driving, she panics, floors it right at him. He jumps clear. The tire hits the windshield, bang. But the car's tough.
But then there's that other sound. Wolfe describes it as a little fuck from the back of the car as they swerve past the other young man.
Who wasn't standing anymore.
And their first reaction, it's kind of shocking. Wolfe says it was exultation.
Yeah. Like they'd faced the nightmare terrain of the Bronx and won. They felt they'd triumphed. Back at the apartment, they're almost celebrating.
But that doesn't last long for Sherman. The guilt starts eating at him. Wolfe shows him unable to focus, this two-track tape playing in his head.
And he's just getting paranoid about newspapers, thinking, how strange it is to live in personal fear of the press.
He thinks about confessing, maybe going to the police with Maria. He feels morally certain they did the right thing, defensively. But his lawyer, Killian, basically says, "Are you crazy? The DA will devour you."
So he pushes it down, rationalizes, starts the cover-up.
And his wife, Judy, is zero help.
Right.
Wolfe paints her as pretty cold, already suspecting the affair. Her whole world is social climbing, appearances, like that awful dinner with the Bavardages.
Oh, yeah. Those characters are something else. And when Sherman's really down, Judy basically tells him she feels pity, but love. Tenderness, nope. She says, "I'm not that good an actress."
Ouch.
Pretty bleak picture for the master of the universe.
Yeah.
His world's starting to crumble. Okay, so let's switch gears to the place that becomes his biggest fear. The Bronx legal system. Wolfe introduces Assistant DA Larry Kramer.
Right, working the Bronx County building, which Kramer calls Gibraltar. And Wolfe paints this picture, total contrast to Sherman's life. People eating deli sandwiches at their desks, scared to go outside. Holdups on the Grand Concourse at 11 a.m. Kramer talks about wearing cheap sneakers so he doesn't look like a target on the subway platform.
It's intense. And Kramer, Wolfe shows us his motivations aren't exactly pure. He sees the Bronx as this laboratory of human relations, sure, but what he really wants is fame.
Recognition, yeah. Wants his name in the papers. Larry Kramer, the Times, the news. He admits loving the power over people.
Especially that little swallow of fright he sees in a rich person's throat. He gets a kick out of that.
And his boss, the DA, Abe Weiss, even bigger agendas, political ones. Wolfe shows Weiss seeing the Henry Lamb case, the hit-and-run victim, and Sherman McCoy as this perfect storm.
A golden opportunity, exactly. Weiss wants to show justice is blind, give hope to the Black and Hispanic communities. And let's be honest, as Wolfe puts it, it's for your cameras and for votes.
It's a very deliberate strategy. Different from the previous DA, Weiss wants a show, needs to prove the system can nail a rich white guy.
And the victim in all this is Henry Lamb, just 18, honor student from the projects, now in a coma.
Wolfe points out the initial hospital visit was kind of botched, right? They just treated a broken wrist, called it a fall. It was his mother who brought him back later with the concussion when he slipped into the coma.
Yeah, and Wolfe mentions how the DA's office initially dismissed it. Typical Bronx case, another piece of shit. It took pressure to get them interested.
Key witness is Henry's friend, Roland Auburn. Kramer interviews him.
And Wolfe shows Kramer sort of sizing Roland up. At first he seems tough, maybe a little threatening. But Kramer thinks he hears something else underneath. A frightened boy.
Kramer calculates he can make a jury feel sorry for Roland, portray him as this kid just wanting a little bit of decency. He even notes Roland's artistic talent. It's all part of the strategy.
And then there's Judge Kavitsky. Wolfe gives us this image of a judge who just yells all the time, barking questions. The whole courtroom sounds chaotic.
So you've got the system, as Wolfe sees it, running on ambition and politics, about to crash right into this human tragedy. The whole thing's ready to blow up.
And guess who's holding the match? The media. Enter Peter Fallow, British journalist, City Light newspaper. Totally cynical.
Sees Americans as hopeless children, ripe for the picking. Wolfe paints him as constantly hungover, broke, desperate for a story. He needs this.
Yeah, he's lost his source, owes people money. He's basically at rock bottom looking for anything.
Meanwhile, out in the community, you've got figures like Reverend Bacon stirring things up. Wolfe shows him organizing protests, action now, using the bullhorn.
Talking about righteous anger, but also about controlling the steam, positioning himself as this prudent broker on Judgment Day. It's quite a performance.
And Wolfe doesn't pull any punches, showing Bacon's manipulation, getting that $350,000 from the Episcopal Diocese guy, Fisk, supposedly for a daycare center.
Right, but then tells Fisk the money's already committed to contractors,
Yep.
arguing he's actually helping Fisk by keeping Harlem and the Bronx from exploding. It's incredibly cynical. Wolfe even describes Bacon's guys yelling slurs at the mayor. It's ugly.
And the media just eats it up. Fallow's there, other reporters. Even Fallow's photographer thinks the protest is a crock of shit.
But Fallow gets his break. He interviews Maria Ruskin at a funeral. Spiner, the dread buccaneer owner of the paper, arranges it. Fallow spots her nervous swallow, knows she's lying.
And gets her to call Sherman that rotten, dishonest bastard. That's the quote he needs.
The city light splashes it. Maria's picture, Fallow's story, fury of the community, luxury car, white driver, big editorial, hit or miss justice.
And that just opens the floodgates, right? The tabloids pile on.
Oh yeah, love nest, tryst pad, picture of the bed, all these gross distortions and manifest untruths, as Wolfe calls them. But they get repeated so often, they become the accepted truth.
For Sherman, it's like his life is just ripped open for everyone to see. An entirely public cavity.
So the legal wheels are turning, the media is fanning the flames, and the DA's office, Wolfe shows them planning Sherman's arrest like a movie premiere.
A circus arrest, yeah. Deliberately public, by the book. For the cameras, for the votes. They wanted to cuff him in his fancy apartment.
Detectives Martin and Goldberg show up. Wolfe describes their questioning as grossly insolent. Sherman finally realizes he needs a lawyer. A terrible admission, he feels.
Calls Killian, based on a recommendation from one of his father's old partners, someone connected.
Then they take him downtown to 100 Center Street, the criminal courts building. And Wolfe makes a point that Sherman, a lifelong New Yorker, had never even noticed this building before. It's totally alien terrain to him.
Like the Port Authority bus terminal, he thinks, full of faces he doesn't recognize.
Outside central booking, there's this crowd. Sherman thinks they're like homeless people at first, but then they all turn and he sees the cameras. Even his own co-op president is there, worried about the protesters.
Inside, the processing. Wolfe describes it as pure humiliation. Take off your belt, shoelaces. His pants fall down. He feels like this abject creature. The smell, the vulnerability, feeling like anyone could just step on him.
He even sees some guy who puked on himself being hosed down in the pen. It's grim.
And the holding pens are just awful. Tedium, discomfort, pain. sitting on a damp jacket, needing the bathroom. Wolfe includes details like the little man who knew the numbers, just yelling for a light over and over. It captures the chaos.
Then the arraignment. Total chaos. Protesters yelling, "Jail, no bail!" Kavitsky shouting for quiet. Kramer goes hard, calls the bail insignificant for Sherman.
Kramer even clashes with Kavitsky, who kind of needles him about playing to his audience.
But Killian, the defense lawyer, he has an ace up his sleeve. Or rather, on a tape. A recording of Maria Ruskin.
Which his associate Quigley got illegally. Killian admits it's so fucking illegal it ain't even funny. Quigley seems kind of unhinged, but effective.
They play the tape in a private hearing in camera.
Yeah.
And Maria, wow. She describes the incident, says, "2 boys stopped us and tried to rob us," says Sherman through the tire.
But then the bombshell. She says Kramer coerced her, gave her immunity if she cooperated, otherwise she'd be an accomplice, told her to just agree with the newspaper stories.
And then just twists the knife, calls Sherman that rotten, dishonest bastard again.
How does Kramer react?
Wolfe shows him initially stung that Maria called him a pompous little bastard, but then relief washes over him.
Relief? Why?
Because it means Sherman, this wasp, this Wall Street aristocrat, is just as much a rat as any street dealer. In Kramer's eyes, it proves Sherman's complicity, his willingness to throw Maria under the bus. It levels the moral playing field for Kramer.
Wow, so the aftermath for Sherman, just devastating.
Total devastation. Shame over the tape, feeling exposed, vilified constantly on TV, prominent investment banker, socialite luxury car, foxy brunette running down the exemplary son of the deserving poor. The narrative is locked in.
His family life suffers too, right? Judy's distant, his daughter's confused. The press is relentless.
And Killian hands him a bill for $75,000 right away.
We are the best, he says. Cure transaction.
And Wolfe sprinkles in these other moments, doesn't he? Showing the wider world of the elite. Pollard Brown and the co-op president worried about property values more than anything. Right. Or that funeral scene. All these luminous personages chatting away while some guy is literally dying on the street nearby. They just avert their eyes, annoyed he's ruining the mood.
And that cynical conversation at the table with Fallow and Steiner, just casually dissecting American society, it all paints this picture of different worlds, completely disconnected.
What a ride through Wolfe's New York. I mean, we've seen how one random, awful event can just tear through the fabric of the city.
Yeah, exposing these huge gaps between wealth and poverty, power and total helplessness. It's stark.
And how narratives get built, right? By
Yes.
media, by politicians. How something repeated enough, like Wolfe shows, just becomes truth, whether it is or not.
We see all these characters, Sherman, Kramer, Fallow, Bacon, justifying their actions, navigating this incredibly messy moral landscape Wolfe lays out.
It really does make you think about the masks everyone wears. The master of the universe performance, the activist performance, the public servant performance.
And what's underneath, that raw reality versus the story being told, and those lines dividing people, even in the same physical space.
So maybe the next time you see one of those sensational headlines, or you see a protest erupting, or just encounter someone whose life seems totally different from yours, it's worth asking yourself,
How much of this is the performance? How much is the crafted narrative? And what might the actual messy reality underneath look like?
Yeah, and what assumptions are you bringing to the table based just on that surface story? Something to think about.